This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Natural Grower. Launched in 2019, their award-winning liquid fertiliser and plant feed and soil conditioner is made entirely from maize. Naturally rich in nitrogen, potash, phosphate and other trace elements that plants and vegetables love, it's approved by the Soil Association, Vegan Society and organic farmers and growers. Their concentrated natural fertiliser can be poured around the base of plants, whilst the plant feed and soil conditioner can be mixed into the soil or compost and used as a mulch on the surface or as a long-term slow-release fertiliser. The fertiliser can be used for all outdoor and indoor plants. As a special offer for listeners, Natural Grower are offering 15% off all their range. Simply go to naturalgrower.co.uk and enter Roots15 on checkout. This week's guest is Carolyn Mullet. Carolyn is an author and garden tour organiser, and I've long been a fan of the beautiful pictures she posts on social media of the gardens she visits. So I was very excited to see that she recently released a book about some of the places she's visited in Europe called Adventures in Eden. In the interview, I speak to Carolyn about the book, and with barely concealed envy, I ask her about the trips she undertakes and the gardens she sees with her company Carex Tours. I start by asking her about the different professional hats she wears.
I actually, my job, I have different jobs. I mean, one of my jobs is running my tour company, and the other one is social media and promotion of my tour company, and also just my take on garden design. That's I see it kind of in two compartments. They're obviously interrelated. I was a garden designer for 30 years. I retired 2 years ago, so I'm not doing that actively anymore. And the way that I became to write the book was actually through social media. I've been active on social media for about 10 years. And I was working for a design build firm. Do you know that term?
Yes.
I don't know whether you use it in English. Okay, a design build firm in my area more than 10 years ago. And when the 2008 recession came, whereas before they had not wanted us to do any promotion of our own work. There were like 10 or 12 designers that worked for them. They suddenly said, by 2010, they said, we need everyone to get out there and promote our work, your own work, set up a website, go on social media, do something, start a blog. So I had already been on Facebook just to follow my daughter, just to figure out what she was doing. And so I decided I'll go to Facebook. And when I first started, I just showed my own work. And then within, 3 or 4 months, I was really bored with that. I thought I really want to show what other people are doing too, in addition to my own work. And that's kind of how I got started in social media, built up a big following, and then Timber Press, one of the editor-in-chief actually at Timber Press, had been following me on Facebook and got in touch with me and said, they'd like me to do a book about gardens that I had seen on my tours. And that's how it started. We kind of negotiated about what garden that was going to be, and I narrowed down the field. I didn't want to do a really broad-ranging book. I wanted to be a little bit more narrow in where my interests lay. So that's how it got started. It was really someone getting in touch with me because of my presence on social media.
Yes. Well, you are very prominent on social media and I love seeing your posts. But talking about that kind of narrowing down the range of gardens that you wanted to write about, how did you choose the gardens that you wanted to put into the book? Because you do have a seeming knack for finding hidden gems.
Um, I I decided I wanted to narrow down to only private gardens, gardens that were designed in the 21st century, or primarily designed or redesigned in the 21st century, and that they would be open to the public at some point each year, either through, a national gardening open days or their area, or some of them, they really have their garden open a lot as a way of funding the garden. Um, and that meant that it got, narrowed. It got very narrow in terms of the gardens that I was going to look at. And, I started out with maybe 75 gardens that I was interested in various countries all across Europe, and then narrowed it down to 50. And some of them, there were only a few that I wanted in that I didn't get to have in the book, either because there were, the garden was going through transition of some kind, maybe ownership, or there was a divorce or something like that. Or I just couldn't get the owners to agree. That happened in a couple of cases. So that's how I came to the gardens that are in the book.
Yeah, so I realise it might be different criteria for each, but how does a garden make the grade for the book, or how does it make the grade to be included in one of your tours?
Well, those are two different questions. The gardens that are on my tours, they're geographically based. In other words, to make a good tour, you don't want to travel huge distances. So, you kind of pick a location and settle into a hotel, and then go out from there 2 or 3 days to see. So it has to have enough gardens in the area. So sometimes, that makes me, for example, in England, you can go almost anywhere and say, I'm going to have my home base here, and I can see, 20 gardens in a week in this area. That's very, very possible. In other places, you have to, have 2 or 3 home bases before you can do that. So it's geography as well as the quality of the garden that I'm looking at, or that I find that there's something interesting going on there. Some of them, for the tours, the theme of the garden, of the tour may be naturalistic planting, for example. So that eliminates a lot of formal gardens, that eliminates usually historic gardens, and you then have, a fairly narrow list of places of people that are actually doing naturalistic planting. And that's kind of the way I organize tours to the Netherlands and Germany, because naturalism is really strong there. But in terms of the book, I have this. I've developed this system where I'm always looking. It's even unconscious at this point. I'm always looking at images and saying, that's interesting, or that's something different, or that seems very well put together. And I take a screenshot and drop it into a folder by area. So, I have many, many gardens in Japan or in Australia, Germany. And so when I'm ready to think about either a tour or gardens for the book, I went to those folders and looked for files or images that I thought would work well.
I imagine you get people approaching you as well with tips, do you?
I do.
Do you do a lot of visiting in your downtime, going and scoping out these gardens? Yeah, I imagine there's loads. Yeah,
I do some when I'm in Europe. So far, my tours have all been, and the book is about Europe, so the focus has been Europe. I hope to expand that now that I'm retired and have more time, and if we ever get out of this pandemic. I hope to do a lot more exploring and garden visiting. But I have, for the tours I have a partner in the Netherlands. It's a garden tour company that has been in existence. It actually is called Garden Tours of the Netherlands. It is, they've been in business for more than 35 years. And so they give me suggestions. Although I like more contemporary things than they generally do. But if I'm really searching for a particular garden or to fill out an itinerary, I ask them for suggestions.
One of the things I found really interesting going through the book and actually looking into your work was, as you say, really, you are a little bit at the mercy of the garden owners. And I assume you have to develop a good relationship with the owners. Well, first, in order to get access to it, but then to be able to write about the vision behind it, which you've done in the book. And it made me wonder if you ever see a correlation between the owners' personalities and the type of garden that they have, or whether you've ever been surprised upon meeting an owner after having seen the garden. You know, does there seem to be a link between the two?
I have to say, I don't think so. I don't think there is.
Interesting.
I think garden owners that open their gardens to visitors are very eager to have connections to a company like mine or to me. And so, they'll drop me a message and ask me to consider their garden for a tour in their area, or they'll see an itinerary that I have, and they say, I think, you're going to be close to my area. Would you stop in? So that's, I've always found them very welcoming, very warm. I like garden owners. I just really have found, they're my kind of people. They are, I would say, and this is nothing that someone has said to me directly, but kind of inferences that I make, everyone is eager to develop their garden, but it takes money. And so having welcoming groups in or individuals in helps pay for that. And so it's like a little business. Some of them are much bigger businesses than others. Others are just very tiny. But that is one of the considerations. I've never been surprised at a garden owner. I think I don't have preconceptions of what they're going to be like. I just don't. So, it's always a pleasant experience. They tend to be very, very warm, want to share. They so much want someone to appreciate their efforts, what they've done, this thing that means so much to them. And, they tend to be very passionate people. They found something that means a great deal to them. And one garden owner, said to me, my garden is my heart. And that, I think that's, although other people haven't said that, I think it's true of a lot of them. So I've never had a situation where it's been unpleasant. Never.
I mean, yes, like you say, they are, people's gardens are generally their pride and joy. So, I can understand why they would want to share it. But you obviously visit a lot of gardens, which, as you say, do not open, as a kind of, generally as part of a bigger business plan. And you're getting to see a lot more gardens on a sort of domestic scale. And I wondered if you'd noticed any changes in gardens over the recent maybe decade or 2 decades in terms of the style. And also I wondered whether private gardens are reflecting the styles that maybe we see portrayed in the media.
I think the big trend, and this has been going on for 20 years, is naturalism. More and more you see gardens that may be less naturalistic. They're adding a piece that is. And then the second trend that I see, which is just in the last 5 years or so, is wildness. This idea that having a part of your garden that's wild is connecting with nature in a different way than a more composed, traditional kind of planting. And, it has to do with interest in wildlife, insects, pollinators, all of that. That has been the big trend that I see now. And it's certainly not something that everyone is taking up, but it's a profound, change from, let's say, 10 years ago. You didn't hear people talking about it as much. Did I answer? What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, no, that was, well, just that whether the gardens are reflecting what we're seeing in the media, and actually there is a big push towards that. So yes, I think they probably are.
I don't know whether the media is reflecting the gardens or the gardens are reflecting the media. I'm not sure which it is, but it's certainly there. It's a big, it's just a big trend, and it's an important one. I think it has to do with our concerns about climate change and how a more ecological approach to planting, it's there, and you see it everywhere. As you say, I think I read the English garden magazines, and they are the biggest purveyor of current trends, I think. And they are and that is a big item in the last few years.
I mean, as a designer and a writer and a professional garden visitor, you, I think, probably know what makes a good garden. So, in your opinion, what is the recipe for a successful garden?
Well, there are a number of things, but I would say the first thing is that a really successful garden has to be of its place. So it has to somehow relate to the topography of the area, the plants of the area, the history of the area. I mean, there's all different ways of doing it, but I think really good gardens do that. A second thing is, for me, they have to function. They have to be a place for people. So it has to be designed in such a way that the paths makes sense for getting from here to there, that there's places for people to sit. There's places for reflection, or, sometimes people could talk about meditation. I don't know how much meditation goes on in gardens, but that kind of thing. And that, if it's a blazing hot climate, that there are places, there are shady places, or, all of those kinds of functional things that people need in order to feel good in a space. And then the third thing that I look at is always the structure of the garden. Is it a high quality structure? A lot of home gardeners don't understand how important that is. And whether it's, hedges or, a kind of, dividing of the space, or, a good kind of overall plan that has structure in mind, that's really important. And then the fourth thing for me is really that it has to be beautiful. I think today, particularly now that we're kind of, a pendulum has swung, so that, I'm hearing people say, well, if a garden isn't ecological, or to the extent that they feel it's important to be, that you really don't, you're not doing it right. And yet I feel like the first thing is beauty. It has to be beautiful. It has to somehow hit you emotionally, and and connect with you emotionally, so that sometimes, it'll take your breath away. It's a kind of beauty that you can't get in almost any other part of your life than this composed nature that is in a garden. And relating to that, this is just my idea. No one else will probably agree with me, but I feel as though there has to be the correct proportion of planting to hardscape, to hard surfaces, and it's about 70% planting and 30% hard surfaces. If you have too much hard surface, it doesn't have it isn't as beautiful as it could be if it had more plantings, more areas for plantings, more lushness, more abundance.
I think there's a lot to be said for juxtaposition of hard surfaces with planting. I've always found that a really striking aesthetic. I do agree with you there.
In the United States, I think I'm probably more aware of it because here in the United States, we don't have a garden tradition like you do in England. You have so many more just baseline influences that tell you have so much more, you rub shoulders with good gardening so much more often than Americans do. And in the United States, there is a tendency to have a huge amount of hardscape and then very minimal or I guess, boy, I hope no one hears. I may get on someone's blacklist for this, but boring planting.
No one's listening.
Boring planting. They just, they use the minimum of different varieties, and so it's just it's not a place I want to be. It's not a place that's going to relax me. It's not a place of retreat or regeneration of one's spirit, which is what I think the garden really does. So I'm probably much more aware of it than because of that than you would be in England or on the continent.
Well, that's really interesting. And that takes me very nicely onto another question, which is, obviously you have a really great overview of the global gardening scene. So again, in your opinion, where in the world is the most exciting place for garden design and innovation right now?
You're there.
So, still, not still.
Well, it's just, there's so much activity there. There's so many good gardens. It's like no other place. England is, to be honest, the things that annoy me about English gardens, but I still think that the innovation is happening there, or at least somehow they pick up on an idea and they take it further, and it's more complete, and it's exciting. I don't see that in other. Maybe I should say UK gardens, because it includes some gardens that I've seen in Scotland too, and Ireland. So I would say the UK. The UK is putting out more innovative gardens at this time.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And I was going to ask you a question that I imagine you may push back on, which was, what's your favourite garden? But perhaps I should kind of ask you that, but then also say, what's the most interesting garden that you've seen perhaps in recent times or heard of, or that you're excited to go and visit?
Well, I'm not going to talk about the gardens in my book because that would be like counterproductive, let's say, to pick out the best gardens in the book. But I'm going to talk about a garden. I'm going to tell you about a garden that I have thought ever since I've seen it, it was the best garden I've ever seen. And maybe it was the mood I was in, and maybe it was just perfect weather, and maybe I don't know what. But and that's Folly Farm in Berkshire, Do you know about Folly Farm? It's Dan Pearson's
Yes.
replanting and reinventing Gertrude Jekyll and Edmund Letchen's garden. It's the combination, for me, it was the combination of extremely beautiful, traditional, what I think of now as traditional hardscapes and elements in the garden, that were the Jekyll and Letchen's that still was existing from their time. And then Dan overlaying breathtaking kind of planting that was, very naturalistic. There is a sunken garden there, and I still remember how clearly you walk in at the top and then go downstairs, of course, since it's sunk, and it's enclosed in hedges. And when I went to the entry of that, and I stepped on the first step and looked around, I practically stopped breathing. It was so exquisite in both its kind of wild naturalism, and yet the hardscape was just harmonious and balanced, and the two just flowed together. It was I would say one of the best garden spaces I've ever been in, and I think that everyone should go see Folly Farm. It's hard to get in, but it's open for the National Garden Scheme, and occasionally you can get in with groups. So that's an exquisite garden, in my opinion. And then in terms of, there is one garden in the book that I think kind of pulled together everything that I think, it means, that is a kind of a leader and let's say a thought leader about gardens. And even though it was designed over the last 20 plus years, it as it has matured, it has really been right on the money in terms of all the trends. And that's Jardin Prud'homme in France. I think they have talked about being of its place and still very forward thinking. I think the grid that they used in that garden to organize the space, it's been used again and again. I see it in gardens everywhere. It was such a great idea. It makes it modern and still allows you to feel comfortable in it while you're in there. It's something that is just, it's a very good garden. Very, very good. I recommend it to everyone.
Yes, I have been to that one. I haven't been to Folly Farm. So
I hope you like Folly Farm. It's a really good one.
How has obviously the events of the past year have affected everybody? How will it change your business going forward? Do you think you'll change anything, or do you think once we reopen, it will all be back to normal, visiting gardens and away we go?
I don't know. It's just a few months too early. We don't know. I think by the end of this year, I'll know a little bit more. I'm assuming, and it may be foolhardy, but I'm assuming that the vaccinations will change everything again, and I don't know whether we're going to go back to what it was before the pandemic, or whether it's going to be something different is going to happen in terms of travel and being able to explore gardens. I just don't know. I do know that some, it sounds as though we are going to be able to travel by next year and maybe even this fall. And so I have already, I'm putting on the website this week, two garden tours, one to England for the Chelsea Flower Show, and then one to France, Normandy. but I'm also prepared to cancel them if the vaccinations don't bring us the kind of safe ability to travel that I hope it will. So I don't really know. I think my work with my tours and the spin-off from my book, I think that's not going to. Once we get to that post-vaccination phase, I don't think it. I think it will be. It will open things up, but I don't know.
I know we're all itching to get back to seeing gardens at home and abroad, and I hope we will get the chance again soon. A really big thank you to Carolyn for taking part in the interview from her home in the States. Thank you as always to you for listening. And don't forget the special offer for listeners over at Natural Grower. They're offering 15% off all their range. Go to naturalgrower.co.uk and enter Roots15 on checkout. So here's Dr. Ian Bedford, talking about some bugs that would be an unwelcome addition to your spag bowl.
Bay trees can be found in many of our gardens and are often grown in pots where space is limited and where they can be clipped into various formal shapes. The strong aromatic oils within their leaves also mean that they're a popular addition to many culinary dishes. These aromatic oils, though, which can be found in many herbs, are actually produced by the plant to protect it from pests and diseases. However, certain pests have evolved to overcome these natural defences and have developed a specific association with a particular herb. This is the case with a small sap-sucking pest of bay, the bay sucker psyllid. Bay sucker psyllid adults are about 2 mm in length and resemble greenish-brown coloured winged aphids. In spring, they emerge from hibernation in leaf litter and begin feeding on the edges of young bay leaves. Toxins within their saliva cause the leaf margins to curl, within which the psyllids start laying their eggs. These eggs soon hatch into fluffy white nymphs that feed within the curls, further deforming the leaves and turning them yellow. Up to 3 generations can occur over the summer months before the final generation adults disperse from the tree for their winter hibernation. Although the damage caused by bay sucker psyllids can be very unsightly, it is unlikely to harm the tree, and many leaves will remain unaffected. If control is required, though, it's not advisable to use long-term systemic chemicals on plants that are going to be used in cooking. Also, these chemicals are not selective and may inadvertently kill many beneficial bugs. Instead, leaf litter should be collected from beneath the tree, curled leaves removed by hand, and the most severely affected areas pruned out in late autumn and appropriately disposed of. Light infestations could also be treated with a soap-based product that will remove the nymphs and not harm the beneficial bugs.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.